Hi, I'm Beanie Colson, and this is my research project on priming generosity through the use of God concepts. It's important first that we understand what priming is. So priming can be described as a psychological technique in which the introduction of a stimulus actually alters how an individual will respond or behave to a following stimulus. So an example of this is yellow to banana. So if I were to show you a picture of something that's yellow and then ask you to name a fruit, more times than not, you would say banana or lemon, something that is yellow, because your brain is making this connection. Obviously, banana is more closely related to yellow than, say, a strawberry. Priming is actually something that occurs subconsciously, and more times than not, people don't even realize they're being primed. And if they do realize they're being primed, they don't realize they're altering their behavior due to the prime. Before conducting my study, I did some research of my own, and it was found that generosity could possibly be primed. So I looked at one study that had the use of eyes above a donation box, and they found that when the picture of eyes was present over a donation box, people felt more inclined to act in a pro-social or generous way. So they actually ended up donating more money than if there was no eyes above them. And then in the study I chose to replicate, they found that if people were primed with religious concepts or God concepts, that they would also act more generously. So you can see here in the graphs below that the people that had the God concepts primed tended to donate about or leave about $5, and the people that did not receive the prime tended to leave only about $2. With that being said, I hypothesized in my study that the participants who received the religious prime, they would actually act more generously than people that didn't receive the prime, because like in the other studies, I was hoping that this prime would initiate the feeling of being watched, and therefore they would act more altruistically than if they didn't have this feeling of being watched. My study was conducted through the help of Mount St. Mary's University students, so I had 137 undergraduate students answer my survey. Their ages ranged from 18 to 22 years old. They were of varying races and genders, and the participants were split randomly between the experimental and control conditions. This study actually required very minimal materials. There was only one survey that was sent out to everybody, and within the survey there were 3 sections. It consisted of the consent form, the scrambled sentence section, and the dictator game. So as you can see on the bottom left, the scrambled sentences would contain something such as divine cake was the, and then you would answer that to the cake was divine, or if you were the control group, it would be cat fastly ran, which would change to the cat ran fast. And then on the bottom right, you see the coins that were used to represent the money in the dictator game, which I'll get into more detail in the next slide. So the study went as followed. Everybody in the school received a link to the survey. If they chose to continue, they were then presented with a consent form where the experiment was explained. If they chose to consent to the experiment, the participant then had to complete the scrambled sentences task, where they answered 15 of the scrambled sentences at their own pace. And then from there, they completed the dictator game. So the dictator game is when the participant is given the scenario that they are given 10 coins, they're able to keep 10 for themselves or donate 10 to the next participant. They can also choose to donate however many they would like to the next participant. So if they would like to leave 2 coins for the next participant but keep 8 for themselves, they're able to do that. This dictator game was used to assess the amounts of generosity, and it was assumed that the more coins you left, the more generous you were acting. After the data was collected, it was found that although it looked as though the prime condition actually left more coins, there was not a big enough difference to assume that this was due to the prime. The independent samples t-test that I ran found that there was actually no statistical significance. The control group only left about 4.8 coins, and the experimental group left about 5.5, which isn't enough of a difference to assume that they're acting more generously due to the prime. So our results can be visualized here in this graph. We see that group 1, which is the control group, and group 2, which is the orange group, across the board they look somewhat even. You can see that in column 5, the blue group actually has a much higher score. However, they also have higher scores in 1, 3, and 4, and the orange group has higher scores in 6, 7, 8, and 9. So if you average them all out, which is what we did in the previous slide, they end up being about the same and show to be non-significant. With that being said, the hypothesis was not supported, and the findings in this study were actually inconsistent with previous research. It was not consistent with the study I was actually replicating. This can be due to many limitations, which I'll go over in the next slide, but I think it's important to understand and realize that my study was conducted online, and so our studies were slightly different. In previous research, it was also found that people are more generous, they tend to participate when they fear other people won't. So it can be partially assumed that the people that were participating are already more generous than those who were not. So it may not be an accurate representation of the population. Like I said, there are limitations to the study like there are in any study. And I think the main one is the lack of environmental control. So people could have already been exposed to a religious prime, especially since this is a Catholic university and there are religious primes across the campus. And this also, the lack of environmental control could have also had outside peers influencing how one may respond. It is a possibility that the prime or the God concept words were not prominent enough. However, the previous study was followed very thoroughly and the manipulations were done very carefully, so that's unlikely. In the future, to make improvements, I would conduct this research in person. I think it's important to eliminate the third variable and gain more environmental control. I think it's also important to have physical coins so the people can be more invested and interested in the dictator game. I think it would be very fascinating to look at how older and younger people are affected by primes and their comparison, and also to look and see if men and women are equally influenced by primes. Overall, I think it's really important to understand that primes still can be used in everyday life, and they can be a learning technique, they can be used as advertising to alter, and there are many uses for primes. That is all. Thank you very much for listening, and if you have any questions, please contact me.